In 1979, two sisters vanished from Greystone Academy. One of them was never reported missing. One left behind a diary, and one never even had a name. The school said they ran away, but 46 years later, what I found sealed beneath the chapel floor said otherwise. This isn't a ghost story. It's a record they buried on purpose. Before we start, hit subscribe to help uncover stories they tried to erase. And make sure no name stays forgotten. My name's Rachel L. Wood. I'm 42, originally from upstate New York, now based in Vermont. I'm an archival researcher, small museums, local historical boards, preservation work. I've spent most of my career sorting through forgotten records, cataloging what's left after time moves on. I never expected to go back to Greystone, and I sure as hell never planned to dig into what happened there. But when the demolition notice came through, something shifted. I was 13 when I first stepped onto that campus. Stone buildings, wrought iron gates, an old Latin motto over the arch that I never bothered to translate. My mother enrolled me without saying much, just that it was better for me to be somewhere structured. I lasted 1 semester. Then she pulled me out without a word, and we never talked about it again. Not once in almost 30 years. But in October of last year, I got a call from the Mornington Preservation Board. The school was being torn down, and they needed someone to document the grounds. Photographs. Documents anything worth saving before the wrecking crews moved in. I was between contracts. I needed the work. I said yes. That's how it started. I remember pulling up to the gates. The metal was rusted but still intact, and the old arch was still there, sapientia et silentium. Wisdom and silence. It was just as cold and gray as I remembered it. The leaves had already turned, and the wind scraped them in circles across the gravel. Most of the windows were boarded up. A few were still intact, just dirty with time. The buildings looked hollow, tired. The site supervisor, a guy named Keller, signed me in from a heated trailer. He barely looked up when he said, "Don't go into the chapel. Mold and structural issues on the 3rd floor, too." I said I'd stay where it was safe. I didn't tell him I'd been a student here once, and he didn't ask what I was looking for. Inside the main building was colder than the air outside. You could feel the draft in your bones. My boots echoed on the tile. Old trophies were still in the glass cases, their brass tarnished and forgotten. The portraits on the walls, stern men in robes, were cracked and faded. Most of the banners were gone. Just the hooks remained. I started in the library. It had aged better than the rest. Tall oak shelves, thick dust, fogged-up windows letting in pale morning light. I pulled out my camera notebook and gloves. Just a standard sweep. Nothing unusual until I noticed the corner. There was a collapsed shelf behind an overturned chair, and behind that a section of wall that didn't match. The bricks were newer, laid unevenly, like someone had done it in a rush. The mortar had already started to crack. It wasn't part of the original structure. That much was clear. I took out the crowbar from my equipment bag. Normally I use it for old crates. But the wall gave way easier than I expected. I cleared a small gap enough to look inside. There was no hallway, just a single room 8 feet by 8 pitch black, sealed on all sides. I stepped inside. The air was stale, damp, smelled like old paper and mildew. In the center of the room was a wooden desk. On top of it, a leather-bound diary. I picked it up. The cover was cracked. The name inside read, Vivian Lockitch, Winter Term, 1979. I hadn't heard that name in years. But I remembered the whispers. Something about a girl who vanished during a snowstorm. Officially, a runaway. Unofficially, no one really knew. I set the diary in my bag carefully and turned to leave. But just before I did, something else caught the light. Under the desk, half buried in dust, was a small rusted pendant, shaped like a keyhole. No chain, no label, just sitting there, like it had been waiting. That night, back at the rental cottage, I opened the diary and started to read. The first line stopped me cold. They told me I'm not allowed to talk about what happened on Christmas Eve, but I don't care. If someone finds this, maybe they'll believe me. She ended the entry with one line. It started in the chapel. I heard her singing again last night. I sat there at the table, the pendant still in my hand, the wind pushing against the window. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. And by morning, I'd already made up my mind. I was going back, because whatever was buried inside that chapel didn't stay quiet for long. I went back to Greystone the next morning. The fog hadn't lifted yet, and the courtyard looked even more hollow than the day before. No birds, no wind, just the soft crunch of gravel under my boots as I crossed to the main building. I didn't stop in the library. I already knew what I'd found there. I was heading to the chapel. I passed Keller's trailer, but the blinds were still drawn. His truck was gone. I didn't tell anyone I was going in. I hadn't told anyone about the diary. Not yet. The chapel sat at the end of the west wing, past the old music rooms, past the broken lockers. The lights in that hallway didn't work anymore. My flashlight caught glimpses of faded scripture along the walls, peeling murals of saints whose names I'd never learned. When I reached the doors, I half expected them to be locked, but there was no padlock, no barricade. Just a smear of white paint over the handle. A mark for demolition. I stepped inside. It was colder than I remembered. The stained glass windows cast muted colors across the empty pews. Dust floated in the air, catching the light like smoke. At the far end stood the altar, ornate, though water-damaged and beginning to sag. I stayed near the wall for a moment, listening. It was quiet. Still. Then I walked down the center aisle. Vivian's diary had mentioned the chapel more than once. She said she heard someone whisper her name. She said it started here. I didn't know what she meant by started, but something about her handwriting stayed with me. The way it was careful, neat, but jittery underneath, like she was trying to stay calm while writing it down. I reached the altar and noticed a small door behind it. It was low, almost hidden behind a hanging cloth. Brass handle. No markings except a tiny keyhole carved into the metal. I took the pendant out of my coat pocket. It was the same shape. I'd brought it with me on purpose, and when I pressed it into the keyhole, it turned. Not smoothly, but enough. I heard the click. When I pulled the door open, a narrow stairwell lay behind it, descending into the dark. The air that rose up was damp and old, like earth and mildew. I turned on my flashlight and stepped down. The stone walls curved slightly as I moved deeper. The stairs were uneven, some chipped at the edges. At the bottom was a square room, bare stone, maybe 15 feet across. No windows, no sound. I swept the beam of light across the walls and froze. Names. Dozens of them scratched directly into the stone. Some were full names, others just initials. One had been circled again and again until the wall had cracked around it, Vivian. Another, barely legible, had been etched deeper than the rest. Emmeline. Underneath all of them, in faint, trembling script, were the words, "No one leaves unless they're forgotten." I stepped back. My hand brushed against the wall. It came away damp, black with mold. I didn't stay long. When I got back to the cottage, I took out the diary and opened to the first marked page. The date was January 8th, 1979. Vivian wrote, "They told me I'm not allowed to talk about what happened on Christmas Eve, but I don't care. If someone finds this, maybe they'll know I didn't run away. Not yet. Something is wrong at this school. It started in the chapel." Then she added, "I heard her singing again last night." I flipped ahead. They say she doesn't exist, but I saw her. I swear I saw her. She was behind the altar when the candles went out. She whispered my name. Vivian was scared. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't poetic. It was quiet, steady fear, the kind you feel when something's wrong, but no one believes you. Another entry read, "Miss Harker gave me detention again. She says I'm delusional, but I saw Natalie's schedule. She's been taken out of morning chapel. That's how it starts. They take you out of chapel and then you disappear. I think they're watching me. I think someone is reading this diary. If I go missing, I didn't leave. I didn't run. I never would have left Emmeline. That was the first time she mentioned Emmeline directly. The name wasn't in any yearbook, not on any roster I'd skimmed. I searched the local archives, town records, even state-level student transfers. Nothing. But the next morning, just as I was about to call it in, my phone buzzed. A voicemail from the town records office. A woman named Jeanette. Miss Elwood, you were asking about a girl named Emmeline. I think you should come in. There's no school record, but we did find a birth certificate and an unfiled death report. No official cause. It was never finalized, just a note, family declined inquiry. One more thing. It says her full name was Emmeline Lockach. Was that the name you gave me? Because it seems she and Vivian were sisters. I sat in the car outside the records office for almost 10 minutes before I went in. Jeanette met me at the front. She looked to be in her late 60s, sharp but kind. She led me to a back room and closed the door behind us. 2 manila folders sat on the table. I didn't say this on the message she told me, but I was a student at Greystone, class of '83. Vivian was older, a few years ahead. Everyone talked about her when she disappeared. She opened the first folder, the birth certificate. Vivian Lockach and Emmeline Lockach, born February 3, 1962, twin sisters. Then the second folder, the death report. It had never been signed by a medical examiner. No autopsy, just a legal note from the school board attorney, incident deemed closed at family's request. Dated March 12, 1979, 2 months after Vivian's first diary entry. I also found this, Jeanette said, pulling out a third document. Inventory report, basement storage at Greystone, last updated before the school shut down. One of the line items reads, Recordings Chapel Interviews, 1979. Audio. Possibly VHS. She wasn't sure. But the location listed matched the blueprint of the chapel annex. Not student accessible. Not on the public tour maps. It was labeled Holding Archive. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept rereading Vivian's words. If I go missing, I didn't leave. I wasn't ready to hear what was on those tapes. Not yet. But I had to know if they were still there. The next morning, I drove to a cul-de-sac just outside Mornington to an address I'd found in the alumni directory. Faculty housing, now private homes. The nameplate on the last cottage still read M. Harker. She answered the door in a cardigan and slippers, mug in hand. Her hair was white, pulled back, but her eyes were sharp. "You're from the board?" she asked. "No. I'm Rachel Elwood. I'm cataloging Greystone's archives. I wanted to ask about 1979. There was a pause. Then she stepped aside. I suppose it was only a matter of time. Inside her house smelled like old paper and tea. Books lined the walls. Notebooks, classics, old lesson plans. She poured 2 cups and sat. "I taught both Lockach girls," she said. Vivian was quiet. Emmeline had an imagination that got her into trouble. What kind of trouble? She said she saw things, heard voices in the chapel, said Father Raymond made her lie about what she saw. "Did you believe her?" Harker hesitated. I believed something was happening to her. But when I asked questions, the board told me to focus on my classwork or retire. I reached into my bag and showed her the pendant. She drew in a breath. "I gave that to Emmeline," she said quietly. "She wore it to chapel every day, said it made her feel safe." "Do you think the tapes are still there?" I asked. "If they haven't been destroyed, they'd be in the holding archive. Back wall, behind the cabinet." She didn't offer to come with me, but before I left she said something I didn't forget. Vivian gave me a notebook. After Emmeline vanished, said if anything ever happened, keep it safe. "Did you read it?" "No," she said. "I was afraid of what was inside. I didn't ask her to hand it over. Not yet." I figured if I made it back from that archive, I'd ask then. I went back the next morning. The fog hadn't lifted from the treetops yet, and the light was still soft enough that the windows looked like old mirrors. I parked at the far edge of the lot near the trail I'd used to reach the chapel's rear entrance. The front doors had been marked off again, fresh tape, new signage. Hazard, structural instability. Do not enter. But I already knew the back path, and I knew what I was looking for. The chapel was colder than before. Quiet, too, but not in the way abandoned buildings usually are. It felt held. The air seemed heavier the deeper you walked in. I went straight to the altar and opened the hidden door. The keyhole pendant still worked. The latch gave with a soft click, and the stairwell behind it felt just as narrow, just as dark. But this time I had a purpose. I was looking for the holding archive. At the bottom of the steps in the stone room where the names had been scratched into the wall, I paused. My flashlight passed over the words again. Vivian, Emmeline, Natalie. A few were crossed out. One had been circled 3 times, and below them, still visible even under a layer of dust, the line etched in small, crooked script, "No one leaves unless they're forgotten." To the left part of the wall was built differently. Not stone wood, slatted paneling warped from years of moisture. I ran my hand along the grain until I felt the edge of a cabinet door. It stuck at first, but after a few hard pulls, it gave way. Inside, on a shelf near the top, were 4 cassette tapes in plastic cases. Each one had a white sticker label typed in the same neat font. Chapel Interview Lock E. Chapel Interview Lock V. Observational Notes. February 13, 1979. Final Interview Far, Confidential. Beneath them sat a leather-bound notebook soft at the corners from age. The cover read, Greystone Student Psychological Logs, Spring Term 1979. I packed the items carefully and left before the light changed. Back at the cottage, I didn't take off my coat. I pulled out the old tape recorder I'd brought from Boston. Originally, I'd meant to use it for oral histories interviews with retired teachers, maybe a former board member. I hadn't planned to hear the voices of 2 missing girls. I inserted the first tape interview with Emmeline Lockatch. Session 3, February 5th. A soft click, then the hiss of static. A woman spoke first. Calm, clinical. Session 3. Present are Nurse Diane Welland and Father Raymond. Then a pause. Then a girl's voice, soft but not timid. Why do you keep asking me the same questions? I already told you I heard her voice. What did the voice say? Emmeline. She said to stay away from the chapel, that something bad happened there. The nurse responded, Emmeline, these stories you tell, they concern the staff. They sound like projections, fantasies. They're not stories. You know what's down there. A pause. And what would that be? The girl's voice dropped to a whisper. The room with the names. The one you keep locked. She screamed in there. I heard her. I know what you did to her. The tape cut off. A mechanical click. End of session. I sat still for a long time. Then I pressed play on the second tape. Vivian Lockatch, Session 4, March 2nd. You've been quiet since your sister's departure, a man's voice said. Smooth, controlled. Vivian's voice was harder to make out. She spoke quietly. She didn't leave. You took her. Vivian, the man said your parents believe Emmeline had a psychological episode. You're under stress. It's understandable. Stop telling me how I feel. Another pause. Then the man, again. If Emmeline were truly in distress, wouldn't it be better for her to receive help? Surely you understand this wasn't punishment. It was protection. You said the same thing before she vanished. And you're safe now, aren't you? Then, a beat of silence, and Vivian's voice just above a whisper. She said she was going to make you remember what you buried. The tape ended. I didn't play the third one right away. Instead, I turned to the diary. I hadn't finished it yet. The final entries were more erratic. She mentioned chapel interviews, said someone was reading her journal. There was one page that had been partially torn out, but the part that remained read, "He asked me again if I remembered what happened. I told him I didn't, but that was a lie. I remember everything. I remember Emmeline screaming in the chapel. I remember Miss Harker crying when they took her away. And I remember what he whispered when the lights went out. No one leaves unless they're forgotten." I opened the third tape. Observational notes. February 13th. It wasn't an interview, just someone reading from a file. Subject EL continues to show dissociative symptoms. Escalating periods of silence. Speaks of visions, the girl in the walls. References names written in bone. Has fabricated a narrative in which she and her sister are being watched by non-existent staff figures. Requests to discontinue chapel therapy denied. Observation team recommends sedation. Next session. That's all there was. They weren't treating Emmeline. They were erasing her. I didn't listen to the last tape until after midnight. It was short 30 seconds, maybe less. No names this time, just the man's voice again. Father Raymond. The Locke girls are more trouble than expected. One vanished. The other turned defiant. This must not reach the board. We're not built for this kind of scrutiny. If anyone asks, they ran. That's all they do. Run. Memory fades faster than records, especially when no one wants to keep them. Click. End of file. I sat in the dark hands in my lap, the pendant still on the table. Across from me, the notebook with the chapel sketches, the scratched names, the old map Vivian had drawn. She'd marked a point on the blueprint labeled burial location. I hadn't paid attention to it earlier. But now I kept going back to one small section tucked beneath the foundation. Not part of the main basement. Not labeled at all. The next morning I brought gloves, a towel, and a trowel. I returned to the stone room just after sunrise. No one was around. The road was empty. The sky had just started to clear. I found the corner Vivian had sketched. It didn't look different, just one section where the ground was uneven, slightly raised. The dirt there was darker, softer. I crouched and began to dig. 6 inches down, the trowel hit wood. It was small, a box the size of a drawer, rotten at the corners but still intact. I pried it open. Inside were notebooks, folded letters, a cloth doll with one eye missing. Every letter was addressed to E. Most signed simply V. I read the first one. "I can't find you. I ask them every day and they say you're gone. But I know you're not. I heard you last night in the chapel. Your voice. You said, 'Tell them the truth.' So I will. I'll keep writing until someone reads this. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. I won't stop trying. V." I placed the letter back into the box and held it to my chest. Then I turned off the flashlight and sat for a moment. In the silence, I thought I heard it. A girl's voice. Faint. Clear. "Thank you." I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up sorting the evidence photos, audio Vivian's notes, the doll, the letter, everything they'd hidden. The next morning, I returned to town hall. Jeanette was waiting. I set the tapes on her desk and said quietly, "I found them." She nodded once, then closed the office door behind me. Jeanette didn't ask how I found the tapes. She didn't ask about the pendant or the bricked-up room or the stone wall full of names. She just watched me lay everything out. 4 tapes, a cloth doll, letters signed V, and the page from Vivian's diary about the night they took Emmeline. When I finished, she reached for the first tape, held it in both hands like it was something delicate. "This is more than just archival," I said quietly. Jeanette nodded once. "I'll help, but be careful. This kind of story, they don't want it told." She offered to log the materials officially through the town's historical preservation records. That would keep it from getting buried again, at least temporarily. I made digital copies that same night, uploaded them to 3 separate cloud drives, encrypted, backed up on an external hard drive I kept under my seat. I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table, the pendant turning slowly in my hand, the words from that final tape still running in my head. They ran. That's all they do. Memory fades faster than records. I opened a blank document and started typing. Title She Didn't Run. What Greystone Tried to Bury, by Rachel L. Wood. The first few lines came easy. Just facts. In 1979, Emmeline Lockatch disappeared from Greystone Academy. Her sister Vivian was told she ran away. No investigation, no autopsy, no closure. But the diary said otherwise. The tapes said otherwise. And 46 years later, what I found beneath the chapel floor told the truth. I hit publish just after 2 a.m. By the time I woke up, what little sleep I did get, the post had already been shared over 1,000 times. By noon, local news outlets had picked it up. Former Greystone students started reaching out. Some remembered Emmeline. Others said they'd forgotten her name until they read it again. People sent old class photos. Someone found a yearbook with Vivian's signature on the inside cover. Keep drawing. Stay loud. V. That evening, I got a message from an anonymous account. They're going to try and make this go away again. Watch where you walk alone. I read it 3 times, then deleted it. The next morning, the Mornington Educational Trust released a statement. It was short, polite, sanitized. While we acknowledge that material from the 1979 term has surfaced, the board wishes to clarify that these records do not reflect the current mission or operations of the institution. The leadership from that era is no longer affiliated. We are cooperating fully with authorities in any historical inquiry. We ask that the public respect the privacy of all families involved. No mention of Emmeline. No mention of the tapes. No apology. I didn't answer the emails that came after that, journalists, podcasters, cold case researchers. Not yet. I wasn't done looking. But then something unexpected happened. A message came through from someone I hadn't thought to search for. Not Vivian. Vivian had passed in 2012, but her daughter had found me. Hi, my name is Ruth. I'm Vivian's daughter. I found your article while going through my mom's papers. I think she meant for someone to know. I think she meant for someone like you. She lived outside of Boston. We met 2 days later at a coffee shop off the highway. She was in her early 30s, dark hair, quiet voice. Carried a banker's box into the booth and set it gently on the table. She never talked about her sister, Ruth said. Not directly. But sometimes she'd hum something, or she'd say a name I didn't recognize. And she always called me M when I was little. I thought it was just a nickname. Inside the box were notebooks, sketches, photocopies of chapel blueprints. At the bottom, taped to the inside of a paperback novel, was a letter. They took her because they could, but they didn't count on memory being louder than silence. We spent hours going through it. Ruth didn't say much after that, just watched like she was still trying to decide if what she'd always felt in her mother's quiet moments had been real. I drove back to Mornington that night, reaching the edge of town just before sunset. My phone buzzed as I crossed into the valley. Caller ID Margaret Harker. I put her on speaker. They've moved up the demolition, she said. What? It wasn't scheduled for another 2 weeks. They posted signs this morning. Asbestos scare. The whole campus will be sealed by Monday. I pulled over. They're trying to destroy the chapel. Yes. Then I need to get back in. Don't go alone, she said. They buried it once. They'll do it again. That night I parked on the old trail behind Greystone. The official gates were locked. New chain, fresh padlocks. But the gardener's path still ran through the woods behind the chapel. I followed it by flashlight, the satchel over my shoulder. The back door opened without force. The smell hit me first, paint thinner, disturbed dust. Someone had been there since I last visited. I moved quickly to the stone room under the chapel, the names scratched into the wall. Scrubbed, the soft rise in the floor where I'd found the box dug out, the small plaque I'd left behind for Emmeline gone. But something had been left behind in its place. A single note, pinned to the wall with a thumbtack. She didn't run. She's still here. You're next. I didn't stay. I backed out of the stairwell and left the way I came. That night, I didn't go home. I parked off the county road halfway between town and the chapel and sat in my car with the engine off. The note was on the seat beside me. No signature, no handwriting I recognized. Just the same thick black marker from before. I'd taken photos. Everything. The erased names, the empty ground, the message. It wasn't just institutional neglect anymore. Someone was still watching, still invested. The next morning, I went to see Jeanette. We met in the same back room as before. Are you absolutely sure, I asked, that no one else outside the board had access to these records? She hesitated. There's one name that shows up again and again in the maintenance logs. Not a teacher, not clergy, just listed as grounds and repairs. She slid a photocopy across the table. Name, Franklin H. Merritt, Role Maintenance Supervisor, 1965-1990. Note, post-retirement access approved for chapel keys. Only 1990-1993. Last known address, Mill Creek Apartments, Unit 102. He had keys to the chapel for 3 years after the school shut down, Jeanette said. I stood up. Is he still alive? She nodded slowly. If he is, he's one of the last people who saw it all. I didn't wait. I drove straight to Mill Creek. The building was slumped into itself, balconies, rusted out paint stripped by time. I found Unit 102. Knocked. Waited. Then again. Finally, a voice behind the door. Who is it, Mr. Merritt? My name is Rachel L. Wood. I'm working with the Preservation Board. I'd like to ask you about Greystone Academy. There was a long pause. I heard the chain slide. The door opened just enough for one bloodshot eye to appear. Greystone's gone, he said. Not yet. No answer. I know about the Lockatch girls, I said. I found the tapes. I've seen the room. Another pause. Then he unlatched the door and let me in. His apartment smelled like newspapers and wood polish. The blinds were closed. A recliner faced the window like he'd been sitting in it for years. You found the room? He asked, voice thin. I did. You shouldn't have gone in there alone. I didn't respond. They made me keep it clean, after they said it was just storage. But I saw the scratches, heard things some nights. Footsteps, breathing, under the floorboards. Did you know what they were doing? I knew enough, he said. Raymond, that nurse, said it was therapy, but they only took the ones who didn't fall in line. Why didn't you say anything? He looked at me. I was the janitor. I kept my head down. That's how I stayed alive. I took the folded note from my pocket and held it out. You left this. He stared at it for a long time. No, he said. But I saw someone in the woods, watching. Not staff. Not anyone I knew. She wore gloves, came at night, always left before morning. Do you remember her name? He walked to a drawer and pulled out a plastic badge holder. Faded photo. Cracked laminate. Name, Marjorie Bellamy, Role Auxiliary Staff. Spring term 1979. Clearance, private sessions. She wasn't supposed to be on staff, Merritt said. I found this in the incinerator chute. She must have thought it had burned. On the back of the badge in small handwriting, a string of numbers. No label, no context. Merritt sat back down. If she's still out there, he said she won't want to be found. I took the badge, placed it in my satchel, and zipped it closed. That night I started searching. I spent most of that night in the records room at Town Hall. Jeanette let me in after hours, left me with 2 keys and a thermos of coffee. The floors creaked under my boots the same way they did when I was 13, sitting outside the headmaster's office. Same ceiling fan, same smell dust and lemon cleaner. The file drawers were old metal, some still labeled in fading typewriter ink. Faculty housing permits, payroll auxiliary staff, 1970, 1982. That's where I started. There were 3 folders for spring 1979, one for kitchen crew, one for grounds, and one for behavioral support contractors. I opened the 3rd and flipped through it slowly, one by one. Most of the names matched known records, licensed counselors, graduate interns, all with state ID numbers. But then I found one with red pencil marks around the edge of the form. Marjorie Bellamy, D.O.B., March 14, 1952, hired Feb. 4, 1979. Position Observational Staff Special Assignment. Verification N.A. Clearance, chapel sessions only. Notes, per verbal approval. Father R. There was no driver's license on file, no tax forms, no emergency contact, but someone had initialed her intake line in blue ink FR. The same initials from the final interview tape. Father Raymond. At the bottom of the sheet was a handwritten number, not a phone number, not an address. 31724 CO RMH 31A. I jotted it down, not sure what it meant yet, and moved on to the building maintenance logs. Greystone's chapel had undergone only one internal renovation in 1979, March 12th, 2 weeks before the Lockhatch file ended. The contractor was out of state, no invoice attached. The note read only, request to seal sub-level access completed by private party, verified by R. Merritt, the same janitor I'd just met. I shut the folder slowly, then checked the time. Just past 3:00 a.m. On the drive back to the cottage, the road was empty. No deer, no headlights behind me, just dark trees and the winding shoulder. But even after I got inside, I couldn't rest. I kept thinking about that number. 31724 CO RMH 31A. I typed it into every open database I had. And finally something pinged. It was a prison intake code. Colorado, Regional Mental Health, Intake Form Number 31A. Assigned to Marjorie Bellamy, date of admission, April 6, 1980. Facility Rock Hollow, Forensic Unit status transferred. New location, sealed by court order. The date hit me first. April 6th, 14 months after Emmeline disappeared, and just 3 months after Vivian was discharged. I kept digging. News archives, legal filings, anything that could track her after 1980. There was nothing, no public records, no mention of parole. It was like she'd vanished except for one anomaly. In 1997, a property deed transferred hands in Mornington County, a small parcel of wooded land undeveloped, just outside the Greystone boundary lines, purchased under a trust. The only name listed on the tax register was MB Holdings, LLC. I printed the coordinates, circled the boundary, and marked the road that led into it. The next morning, I borrowed a county GPS unit and hiked out there alone. The forest was dense but familiar. Same ridgelines I remembered from my time as a student. Same pines. Same sharp scent of frozen moss underfoot. But near the eastern edge of the plot, where the land dipped into a small hollow, I found something. It wasn't a cabin, not a home, just a single prefab trailer tucked behind the trees, barely visible unless you were looking for it. The windows were covered in foil, no number on the door, but there were tracks in the mud recent. Someone had been there within the week. I didn't knock. I just circled once, slowly taking photos. Then I left the way I came. Quiet. quick, careful not to be seen. That night I sent the coordinates to Jeanette, asked her to check if anyone in law enforcement had eyes on the property. She said she'd get back to me. That was Thursday. On Friday morning, someone slashed my back tire. The car was parked just off Main Street, broad daylight. I didn't hear anything. Just came out of the hardware store and saw the gash clean through the sidewall. Whoever did it didn't take anything. Didn't leave a note. Just enough damage to slow me down. I had the tire replaced. Paid in cash. Took the long way home. No calls. No updates. Just that voice in my head again. You're next. Late that night, I went back to the box Ruth had given me. Vivian's papers. There was one thing I hadn't looked at closely. A folded flyer from a chapel music recital in 1978. On the back, Vivian had scribbled something in pencil. The wall was cold when I touched it, but something behind it was warm, like breath. The next page in her notebook held a sketch I'd seen before. Chapel layout, arrows, notations. One small marking at the bottom. Access only when the clock is wrong. I didn't understand what it meant until I pulled up the blueprint again. The chapel had two interior clocks, both ornamental, fixed at 9:10 since the 1950s. But one of them, the west-facing clock, had been replaced during that 1979 renovation. The hands were set at 7:45. I zoomed in on the diagram. The gears that ran behind the clock led to an old pipe chamber, one no longer used for plumbing. It wasn't listed as part of the standard basement layout. It was off to the side, narrow, vertical. The next morning I drove back to the chapel. The sun hadn't fully risen yet. The air was damp. I parked by the trail again, followed the overgrown path to the rear door. Same key, same cold silence. Inside, I made my way past the altar down into the archive room and over to the wall where the old maintenance shaft had once been covered. This time, I brought tools. It took me 2 hours to remove the panel. Behind it was a chute, narrow, rusted, but not sealed. I dropped a flashlight down first, waited, then climbed after it. The pipe chamber was smaller than I expected, maybe 6 feet across, 15 deep. Dirt floor, crumbling walls, and in the center of it, beneath a sheet of old tarp, was something I didn't expect to find. A small wooden bench, a hairbrush, and next to it, a child's boot. I crouched slowly. There was something carved into the floorboards. Elocak, December 24th, 1979. Listen below. I pressed my ear to the floor. Nothing. Then I tapped once with the end of my flashlight. The echo was hollow. There was another space below this one, and I hadn't reached it yet. I left everything where it was and backed out, sealing the panel behind me. I marked the location on my map and walked straight to Jeanette's office. I need a team, I said. You'll need permits, maybe a forensic warrant. But I know where she is. Jeanette didn't speak right away, just stood up slowly and walked to the cabinet where she kept restricted files. She pulled one, handed it to me. New court order came through this morning, she said. All Greystone sublevels are now under federal review. We're locked out. I opened the folder. The top of the document read, United States Office of Faith-Based Facility Compliance. Beneath it, sealed until further notice. Investigation pending. They're shutting it down again, I said. Jeanette nodded. But they left something behind, I said quietly. They always leave something. She looked up. What did you find? I slid the drawing across the table. Vivian's sketch. The one with the clocks. This part of the chapel isn't on any record. But I know what's under it, and I think she does too. Jeanette stared at it for a moment. Then she whispered, Then we'll go ourselves. We waited until the following Sunday. Jeanette made the call not to the sheriff, not to the town board, but to someone she trusted from her university days. A structural archaeologist now working with the Historical Recovery Unit in Asheville. Name was Dr. Carmen Mendez. Quiet, focused. Carried a field bag that looked like it had been through every excavation east of the Mississippi. She showed up in an unmarked car boots muddy before she even stepped inside the chapel. The building had been officially sealed, but Jeanette still had keys from the preservation assessment. She signed the ledger just in case. 1 entry, 3 names, 1 date. We brought lights this time. Portable battery units, rope, respirators. I led the way through the rear corridor down past the organ room and into the small alcove where the pipe chamber entrance had been recovered. Carmen tapped the wall with a gloved knuckle, listened to the echo. This panel was added later, she said. Not part of the original blueprint. Probably plywood over bricked vent shafts. She handed me a pry tool. It didn't take much. The panel fell back with a soft creak, and the hollow space opened in front of us. We lowered the rope first tied off against a support beam, then dropped the first pack of lights into the shaft. It hit dirt after about 12 feet. Carmen went down first, then me, then Jeanette. Inside it was colder than I remembered. The air was still but not stale, just quiet, pressed between time and soil. The bench was still there. The boot. The small carving in the floor E. Lockhack. December 24th, 1979. Listen below. Carmen crouched beside it, ran a handheld scanner over the floor. Something pinged metal. Large. Just beneath the planks. This isn't just a crawl space, she said. This was meant to be sealed. But something's under here. We took turns clearing the floorboards. Careful, quiet. No saws, just pry tools and silence. Each piece lifted revealed more dirt, more stone. Until finally at the center we hit metal. A hatch, rusted square with no handle. Jeanette leaned in. Is it bolted? No, Carmen said. Just welded shut. We took a break. 8 protein bars in silence. I turned the badge over in my hand. Marge Gary Bellamy's photo cracked at the corners. Her eyes frozen in that moment just before a flashbulb. On the back, those same intake numbers from Rock Hollow. When we returned to the hatch, Carmen used a portable torch to heat the edges. It took 40 minutes. The welds hissed, metal gave, and finally, with a groan that shook the dust from the rafters, the door shifted. I went down first. It wasn't a room, not at first. Just a steep ladder into blackness walls, closing in, then widening into a vaulted subcellar, maybe 20 feet across. The air changed the second I reached the floor. Warmer and wet. There were no windows, no ventilation I could see. Just the slow drip of condensation and the sound of something small, maybe a mouse, skittering through debris. I swept the light left. There was a desk, a small cot, a cracked mirror nailed to a wall, and beside it, in the far corner of the room, something that stopped me cold. Chains. They were still bolted to the wall. Old leather cuffs. One snapped, one still intact. Jeanette lowered herself next, followed by Carmen. None of us said anything at first. We didn't have to. The room was exactly what Vivian described in her notes. Cold walls, no lights, no bed, just the frame of one. And that feeling when you stepped inside that something had happened here too often to forget. Carmen moved toward the back wall, shone her light across a series of chalk marks. Tally lines, faint but visible. Dozens of them scratched deep into the plaster with a stone or nail, counted out in groups of 7, at least 42 weeks, maybe more. Then she turned to the desk. It held one object, a cassette tape, unlabeled. I reached for it carefully. The case was cracked. Dust settled into the corners, but the tape was still intact. We didn't listen to it there. We closed the hatch, resealed the panel, and left the chapel the way we came. Back at Jeanette's office, we set the tape into a digitizer and let it roll. The audio began with static, then a child's voice, hushed, tired. My name is Emmeline Lockach. If someone hears this, I didn't run. I was taken. They bring me food sometimes. Say I'll get better if I just stop fighting. But I can't. I see her at night. The one with gloves. She hums that song, the one from the recital. My sister will know. She always knew what they were hiding. Please don't forget my name. If anyone finds this, tell her I remember. I remember the clock being wrong. I remember the stairs. I remember... The tape cut out. Just static. Jeanette covered her mouth. Carmen looked away. I leaned back in the chair. Do you believe me now? I asked quietly. Jeanette nodded once. We need to take this to the state board. Now. But I stopped her. There's one more name I need to find first. That night I drove back to Mill Creek. I knocked on Franklin Merritt's door just after 9. He opened it slower, this time looked older than he had a week ago. I know you lied to me, I said. You said you didn't know her name. But you did. You knew about Marjorie. You knew what she was doing, and you still let her come and go. He didn't deny it. She said they'd kill the others, he whispered. Said Emmeline was too loud, that she needed correction. I kept the floors clean. I didn't touch her. Did she ever leave anything behind, I asked. Notes. Maps, a journal. He shook his head, then paused. There was a box, he said. Locked. She kept it behind the chapel boiler. I never opened it, but when they told me to shut the place down, I left it there. Figured it wasn't mine to bury. I stared at him. Do you remember where exactly, right wall? Under the copper stack. You'll need a crowbar. I turned to go. He said one last thing before I reached the hallway. She used to hum to herself. Same tune every night. What tune? He looked at me. I don't know the name, but it's the same one your article linked to that recital. December 1978. The piece Vivian played. That's how they chose her. I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't need to. The next morning I went back one last time, alone. The chapel was still standing. No police, no barriers. Just the same dead silence I remembered. I found the boiler, moved the panels aside, and behind the pipes, just like Merritt said, was a rusted lockbox. I took it out carefully. Didn't open it yet. The sun was rising when I walked out, and that's when I saw her. A woman, mid-60s maybe, standing at the edge of the woods, watching me. She didn't wave, didn't speak, just turned and disappeared into the trees. I brought the lockbox back to Jeanette's that same morning. The sun was barely up. We didn't talk much, just sat in her office, curtain drawn, door locked, both of us staring at the rusted clasp like it might do something on its own. It took me a few minutes to crack it open. The hinges were stiff, warped from decades of heat and cold. But once the lid gave, I knew we were looking at something they hadn't meant anyone to find. There were 5 items inside. A ring of keys. A folded envelope labeled Property of RH Internal Use Only. A journal thin, hardbound initials, MB, embossed faintly on the corner. A manila folder with the edges curled in from moisture. And at the bottom a photo. Black and white, curled at the corners. 2 girls standing in the snow. Emmeline and Vivian. I picked up the envelope first. Inside were letters, all typed, all marked confidential. Each one addressed to the same name, Father Raymond Healy. The signature at the bottom was always the same, Dr. Ellis Renford, Director, Rock Hollow Residential. The earliest one was dated October 11th, 1978. Raymond Per, your request transfer intake of subject E. Lockatch is approved. Record has been amended to reflect parental authorization. No formal paper trail attached as arranged. Please adhere to your end of the agreement documentation to remain internal facility listed as inactive on public record. We will not engage if contacted by media or law enforcement. ER. Another one a month later. Raymond, we've received your concerns about subject behavior. Reminder, the terms of this arrangement allow you discretion, not termination. If she poses a risk, isolate. Avoid chapel exposure. You know what's buried beneath it. I placed the letter down. Jeanette didn't say anything, just reached for the folder. Inside were 2 intake forms. The first was Emmeline's, the second Vivian's. Both files were identical except for one line near the bottom. Next of kin, no living relatives confirmed. Jeanette pointed at it. That's false. Their parents are listed in the original school directory. They were removed, I said. Paperwork filed under Section 4C. That means wards of the institution. Someone erased them. She turned the page. A third form was clipped behind them. Blank template. No name. But scrawled in pen across the top corner to be used if the second fails. Jeanette lowered the folder slowly. There was going to be another. I reached for the journal. The handwriting was small, clean. Not a child's, not Vivian's either. The first entry was dated January 2nd, 1979. New transfer arrived this week. Subject shows high resistance to adjustment despite controlled environment. Lokach Emmeline, age 12. Displays paranoia, sleep disruption, auditory hallucinations. Claims to see a second version of herself. Requires monitoring. Her sister continues weekly chapel sessions. Subject appears calm during interaction but exhibits physical distress post-visit. Suspect sympathetic memory reinforcement. Suggest limiting contact. Father Raymond has requested evaluation forms be kept separate from chapel records. I've complied. For now. The entries shifted halfway through. Shorter. Frantic. Subject's voice recorded in basement at 2:17 a.m. 2 sets of footsteps. No staff scheduled. Doll found torn apart outside chapel. Name stitched inside lining V. Lokach. She keeps humming. Same melody each night. The final entry was different. Dated March 11th. Emmeline's gone. Vanished during light check. Doors were locked. No staff recall letting her out. Father Healy says no search is needed. Chapel files to be destroyed. This is wrong. I've seen the room. I know what's under the floor. I'm not part of this anymore. It wasn't signed, but the initials on the spine MB told us everything. Marjorie Bellamy. The nurse. She'd kept records, secretly, and when it became too much, she walked away, or was forced to. Jeanette picked up the keys next. There were 4, all labeled. One said Chapel Sublevel, another East Wing Records. We didn't waste time. We drove to the back lot of Greystone where the East Wing had been sealed since the 90s. Jeanette used her master access card to bypass the alarm, then slipped the key into the rusted lock beside the archive door. It clicked. Inside was pitch dark. Rows of cabinets, metal shelving, warped from water damage mold trailing the baseboards. We opened drawers slowly, careful not to rip what was left. Third cabinet down, second drawer from the right. Jeanette stopped. Here. It was a logbook. Laminated pages, mostly water-blurred. But one entry stood out. March 12, 1979. Name E. Lokach. Status transferred. Destination Rock Hollow. File sealed. But someone had crossed out the word transferred. Next to it, in red pen, they'd written buried. We both stared at it. No more code. No more denials. They buried her. Not just physically, but in paper, in silence, in rewritten forms that made it all look clean. Back at Jeanette's, we packed everything into evidence sleeves. She contacted the district court liaison. I sent copies of the audio files, journal scans, everything we had to. Dr. Carmen Mendez, who'd already started drafting an affidavit for chain of custody. I asked Jeanette once before I left her office that night why she hadn't walked away when I brought her that first tape. She looked at the photo of Emmeline and Vivian on her desk and said quietly, "Because I knew girls like them. I taught some, and some just stopped showing up. I didn't respond. I took the original photo with me, slipped it into my notebook. That night I stopped at the overlook above the town. The air was cold, still. Lights below blinked quietly like nothing had happened. But I knew better now. They'd built this town on memory, on forgetting, on silence. And someone still knew. Because before I left, I got a letter in my mailbox. No return address, just a single folded page. Inside it said, "Stop digging. She wasn't the only one." The letter had no return address, just those 4 words written in block print. Stop digging. She wasn't the only one. I kept it, but didn't show Jeanette right away. I wasn't sure if it was a threat or something else. We didn't stop. That week, Jeanette formally submitted the journal, the tapes, the lockbox contents, and the photo evidence to the county district attorney's office. She filed it through official channels, no leaks, no press. But the weight of what we'd found couldn't stay sealed for long. By Thursday, the DA's office had contacted 2 former staff members of Rock Hollow, 1 registered nurse, 1 administrative clerk. Both were in their 70s now. Both denied knowing anything at first, but when they saw the photo of Emmeline and Vivian, their responses changed. The clerk asked to see a lawyer. The nurse asked for a glass of water, then whispered, "She was the quiet one, wasn't she?" A grand jury was convened. It didn't move fast. Nothing involving institutions ever does. But piece by piece, the outline of a cover-up took shape. Greystone's chapel hadn't been the center of worship. It had been a point of intake. Records showed the sub-basement had been used for medical isolation as far back as 1959. 2 inspection requests filed under structural rot were approved in 1977 and 1978. Both times work logs were incomplete. Jeanette testified. So did the forensic analyst who examined the tapes. The audio wasn't faked. The ages matched, and the names Emmeline, Vivian, Father Healy appeared in archived letters dated and signed. No body had been found. But the court acknowledged that the evidence presented was credible and consistent with institutional concealment of abuse resulting in likely death. Father Healy was already deceased. He'd passed in 1992 from congestive heart failure, but 2 others were still living. Dr. Ellis Renford, the Rock Hollow director, was placed under investigation. He was 89, residing in a private facility in Oregon, declared mentally unfit to stand trial, and the man who approved the school's funding at the time, a former councilman named Howard Kellner, was subpoenaed for perjury. He denied knowing the girls, denied ever hearing of Greystone's sub-basement. But in a box from his garage found during a state audit, there was a campaign ledger with handwritten notes. One said 1978 Lawcatch clearance, paid in trust. He was charged with obstruction of justice and tampering with state education funds. The headlines were quiet. A few regional articles, a podcast episode 1 local station segment. Most of the town didn't want to talk about it. Old teachers retired, buildings renamed, records reprinted. But Greystone's archive didn't lie. The school board issued a public statement. We acknowledge historical failures in oversight and regret the harm caused by past administrators. We affirm our commitment to transparency and child safety moving forward. No mention of names. No mention of Emmeline. Jeanette pushed for a memorial to be placed on the school grounds, just a simple plaque. But the district declined, citing legal sensitivity. So instead she hung the photo of Emmeline and Vivian in the hallway outside her office. Small frame. No caption. But anyone who asked, she told them. I filed a final report with the state's Office of Historical Disclosure. Not many people knew that department even existed, but it keeps track of unresolved institutional cases. I sent copies of the journal, the transcripts, and the letter I'd received. They logged it under Greystone, Lawcatch Inquiry Open, 1979-2025. Open. That word stuck with me. Justice wasn't loud. No one marched. There were no cameras. just slow, steady acknowledgement. Some names were added to sealed indictments, some files reclassified, and others like Emmeline's were finally quietly made official. Her name appeared in the state register that spring, listed under presumed deceased involuntary custody. It wasn't everything, but it was more than she'd had in 46 years. I kept getting emails, former students, neighbors. One woman said her older sister had attended Greystone in the late 70s and came home different. Never talked about it. Another remembered hearing humming in the hallway always around dusk. One message came from a woman named Clara Hoffman. She said she used to work at Rock Hollow, that she'd left in 1980, and that she still had something kept in a storage unit just outside Lakeville. She wrote, "I wasn't brave enough to speak then, but I think you should have it now." I told her I'd meet her the following week. Clara met me just outside Lakeville, storage unit on the edge of a dried-up outlet mall. She looked older than I expected, early 80s maybe, but sharp. Wore a windbreaker canvas shoes, hands steady when she passed me the box. She didn't stay long, just said I kept it because I couldn't throw it away. But I didn't know what to do with it either. Then she got in her car and drove off. Inside the box, an old staff badge from Rock Hollow, 2 file folders, and a faded ribbon, deep blue, almost black. It had a name stitched in thread. Not Emmeline, not Vivian, just V. The folders were labeled 6A and 6B. Inside were printed rosters, dozens of names, most crossed out, and tucked between them a small hand-drawn map of the chapel. In the margin, voices, below the gate. It didn't answer everything, but it confirmed what we already knew. Greystone wasn't an accident. It wasn't just one predator, one oversight. It was a system, structured, sustained, and for years it had worked, because no one listened to girls like Emmeline. I gave the contents to Jeanette. She handled it from there, added it to the submission file, sent copies to the state. We didn't talk much after that. Some cases don't end with handcuffs or cameras. They just settle, like dust in a chapel basement. I don't go back to Lockhatch, not even to visit. Sometimes I look up named students from Greystone staff from Rock Hollow. See where they landed. A few are gone. A few changed theirs completely. One started a nonprofit in Virginia for kids aging out of state care. I don't know if that's connected. Maybe it doesn't have to be. Emmeline's photo is still on Jeanette's wall. I stop by once a year quietly. No press, no flowers, just to make sure it's still there. There's something else, too. At night I hear it sometimes. Not voices, not music, just silence. The kind that shouldn't be there. Silence at the end of a hallway. Silence behind doors that should have been opened. It's not frightening, just unfinished. Like a question that never found its answer. I think stories like this don't leave you. Not really. You don't solve them. You carry them. You carry the names, the gaps, the echo. And if you're lucky, you find a way to make space for them to say, "I heard you," because silence is how they disappeared, and remembering is how we bring them back. If this story stayed with you, share it. Say her name, so no one gets buried in silence again.